Why is it that two women can walk into the same room with the same credentials, the same preparation, the same capability, and yet one of them commands it and the other has to fight for it? The difference is not talent, it is not likability, it is not even luck, it is architecture. I became obsessed with this question after studying the women who never seemed to have to fight for the room. The ones where authority is not debated, it is simply assumed. I found a pattern every single time. There are three things these women understand about image and authority that most women have never been taught. Not style, not appearance, but architecture. The deliberate construction of how you are perceived before you speak a single word. If you have ever walked into a room and felt a gap between how capable you are and how seriously you are being taken, this is that gap explained. The moment you walk through the door, every person in that room is already forming an impression, automatically without choosing to. This is not bias in the conscious sense. It is just how the brain processes social information. Princeton researchers found that people form judgment of competence, trustworthiness, and dominance within 100 milliseconds of seeing a face. 100 milliseconds. Before a word, before a handshake, before a single credential has been mentioned. And in finance specifically, a 2021 study in the Journal of Finance found that women presenting to investment committees are interrupted at significantly higher rates than male presenters in the first 3 minutes of a pitch. The room is deciding before a pitch has even begun. I used to walk into rooms and start from the content. Here's the deal. Here is the data. Here is why this works. And I would spend the first 10 minutes of every pitch fighting a perception that had already been formed before I even sat down. That shift was understanding that the pitch started before I opened my laptop. Once I started directing that, deliberately every time, the room received the content differently. Not because the content changed, because the signal that preceded it did. Before your next high-stakes room, decide in advance who is walking in. The room is already forming an opinion regardless. The only choice is whether you are authorizing it. But here is where most women stop. They adjust the entrance, the wardrobe, the posture. The second thing, there is a version of presence that is performed, assembled for specific rooms, specific audiences, specific stakes. And there is a version that is practice, built through reputation until it becomes a default. The women who sustain authority in male-dominated environments are not performing. They are expressing something they have inside them already built. A study from the Center for Talent and Innovation found that executive presence, the quality most frequently cited as distinguishing senior leaders, is perceived as consistent across contexts for men and inconsistent across contexts for women. Men are given the benefit of the doubt on authority. Women have to earn this every single time in every room. The performance model is not just exhausting for women, it is structurally more costly. In finance, consistency of presence is everything. The room reads inconsistency as uncertainty, and uncertainty in a deal environment has a direct cost. The days when I was performing were the days the room felt it. They would probe more, they would push back more, and test more. The days when I was expressing something I had already built, those were the days the room settled, because they couldn't feel like it was a performance. Rooms trust what does not feel like effort. Where does your presence live when nothing is at stake? That is your baseline. And that baseline is what shows up in every boardroom. Raise it by practicing in every room that is not high stakes. Once the baseline is built, practice not performed, there is one final shift. And that is the one almost no one talks about. The third shift. Most women measure their authority by how the room responds. Did they take me seriously? Did the energy shift when I spoke? Did the dynamic change? And on the days it does not, they start adjusting, second guessing, changing what they are doing before it has had time to land. Research from INSEAD found it takes an average of 6 to 8 consistent behavioural exposures before professional peers meaningfully update their perception of a colleague. In finance, where reputation is built over years and deals, not meetings, that number is likely higher. If you are measuring your authority by the immediate response in every room, you will keep changing what you are doing before anyone has a chance to update what they think about you. I changed my approach too many times in the first few years, not because it was not working, but because the room had not confirmed it, and I mistook that for failure. Every time I changed the approach, I reset the clock. The room never got to 8 exposures I needed to update that impression of me. I was perpetually starting over. The shift that ended that cycle was tracking one thing. Did I show up the way I decided today? And then I stopped changing. I waited and the room caught up. That is the only measurement that compounds over time. Here is what the data actually says about women and authority. McKinsey's 2023 Women in the Workplace report found that women are still significantly underrepresented at every level of corporate leadership above entry level, despite outperforming their male counterparts on most measurable performance indicators. That gap is not performance, it is perception, and perception is not fixed. It is not the verdict of your capability. It is information. It is architecture. It is something you can direct. Appearance is not vanity. It is communication. It is the first signal of leadership in every room that decides before you speak. And when you start directing that signal, instead of leaving it to an industry that has a long history of directing it for you, something shifts. You stop trying to be taken seriously, because you have already decided you are. That is what I'm building for women who have decided. More soon.